friends are since.
One problem that I have, which I think a lot of you will probably be able to relate to, is that when I'm making music at home, I usually have to wear headphones to avoid pissing off my neighbours, especially late at night. Now I'm lucky enough to have a bunch of different, very comfortable wired headphones that also sound excellent, but I find that being tethered directly to my audio interface is really irritating, especially if I'm using something like my modular gear, where I have to move about a lot, or playing guitar or something like that. Now I've tried to figure out different ways to get around this problem, including the use of long aux extension cables, but those always end up getting tangled or caught up in something and ultimately just cause more trouble than they are worth, to be honest. The ideal solution, of course, would be to have some kind of wireless headphones, but with those, you usually run into the problem of latency. So in other words, how long it takes the audio to reach your ears from the source. The higher the latency, the greater the delay, and whilst this isn't a problem if you're just listening to music, it very quickly becomes a major issue for production purposes. Getting accurate figures on latency is pretty difficult because it depends on a whole host of factors, including hardware and software that you're using. But with Bluetooth, on average, there's a range of about 100 to 500 milliseconds, so 0.1 to 0.5 seconds delay. And that is apparently not uncommon, and therefore useless for recording or DJing or whatever else. Now, there are some specialist headphones out there that promise ultra low latency for high quality audio. However, these are not cheap, and I personally wasn't prepared to, spend hundreds of pounds on a set, only to find out later that they weren't actually any good in practice. Fortuitously, a few weeks back, I got an email about the launch of an alternative, the Studio Max 1 from One Audio, or Audio, I don't know how they're pronouncing it, in Hong Kong. Now, I'd never heard of this company before, but with these, they promised to deliver an ultra low latency of just 20 milliseconds, coming in at only £135. And if this was true, then these headphones seemed like they might be an affordable way to get that elusive cable-free experience. So I gladly agreed to check them out for myself, see what they were like in practice, and put together this video. To be honest, I wasn't necessarily expecting too much from these. However, when the packaging arrived, I was pleasantly surprised to find that everything seemed pretty nicely put together and of a decent quality. In the box, you get a bunch of accessories, including a handy travel pouch, as well as all of the various bits and bobs that you need to get up and running immediately. The headphones themselves are made of plastic and pretty lightweight, but they've also got enough substance in them to not feel cheap and nasty. Both the headband and ear cups are padded with soft foam and covered in what I presume is some kind of pea leather type substance, which, coupled with their circumaural nature and minimal clamping force, means that they're very comfortable for longer listening sessions, even for somebody like me who's got glasses and piercings to contend with. The headband is adjustable, as one might expect, but the ear cups also tilt and swivel with a surprising degree of flexibility. On top of that, they also fold down into a pretty compact package for portability. Overall, I think that they look and feel pretty good, and I especially like the details on there, such as the red stitching on the headband and the large left and right indicators inside the ear cups. Nothing is more of a pain in the arse than trying to figure out which side is which when you're in the middle of DJing or making music, so that's a nice touch. The way that these things work is that you get a dedicated transmitter that plugs directly into the headphone output of your source, which then beams the audio wirelessly to the Studio Max 1s. In the box, there is a short, coiled 3.5mm stereo cable with a screw-in 1/4" jack adapter to let you connect up to a variety of different devices, including audio interfaces, synthesizers, blah de blah. Pairing the transmitter and headphones together is quick and easy the first time, and after that they have connected up automatically when they're both powered on with no hassles at all. It is about as smooth a process as it could possibly be. The transmitter itself is smaller than an old TV remote control or an iPod and is also very lightweight. But despite this, the battery life is listed as an impressively long 120 hours or 5 full days, though to be honest, I haven't stress tested that claim myself, but it does seem to run for a fairly long time without having to be charged. Both the transmitter and the headphones charge over USB-C, and unlike some other similar low latency headphones that I could mention, the The port on these is thankfully in an accessible position, so you don't need a weird right-angled cable or anything like that. Now, you're not limited to just using these with the fancy low latency wireless mode, as they can also be operated either over bog standard Bluetooth connections or, plugged in directly with a cable. One especially smart detail is that the headphones have got a 1/4" jack connection on one ear cup and a 3.5mm connection on the other ear cup. And in the box you get a cable with one connector on each end, which means that if you want to connect up to different devices with different sized connectors, you can just switch the cable around, which is pretty cool. One thing to note about this though is that the mini jack connection in the headset is recessed in a way that means that using standard aux cables probably won't be as satisfying an experience as using the one that you get in the box. When it comes to sound, whilst these headphones are unlikely to win over the audiophiles out there, I think that they actually sound pretty decent for what they are. And in particular, they've got more bass and a much wider soundstage than I would have expected, which gives you something of a kind of immersive experience. With that said, these are definitely not ultra flat reference style headphones. They do have a particular character to them, and so I personally wouldn't use them for mixing or mastering. However, for composing, tracking, arranging, or just casual listening, they are perfectly fine, and arguably probably better than a lot of the other similarly priced mass market headphones that you'll find out there. One thing worth noting is that if you crank up the volume on the headphones to near the maximum level, which is actually pretty loud, the noise floor also raises. This is something that's common with other low latency wireless headphones, and it kind of sounds like the hiss associated with active noise cancellation. You can mitigate this by ensuring that your source signal is nice and strong, which isn't a problem if you're using an audio interface or something with a decent amount of juice. But I know that some people are especially sensitive to this kind of thing, and if that is the case for you, you'll need to consider if the trade-off of this is worth it to have the freedom of wireless headphones. In practice, I haven't found this to be an issue at all. When it comes to latency, there is always going to be some kind of delay when transmitting audio thanks to, physics. And that is the case even with wired headphones or when physically playing guitar through an amplifier. Now, I'm sure that many of people will have many strong opinions on what constitutes acceptable levels of latency, and they'll probably claim to be able to hear even the tiniest of delays. However, the reality is that the impact and importance of latency will very much depend on you and what you are doing. Speaking personally, I am much more sensitive to any kind of delay when it comes to recording something like vocals with full band arrangements. However, if I'm bashing out beats, step sequencing synth lines, or tweaking parameters on my modular, then a latency of 20 milliseconds or thereabouts really doesn't make any difference at all, especially if I'm going to be nudging, stretching, or quantizing the audio in post-processing anyway. Over the past few weeks, I've tried these out in a variety of different circumstances, and as something of an obsessive weirdo, I fully expected to notice a delay, but I honestly just haven't. I even dusted off my bass and guitar to record some scuzzy Jesus Lizard style tracks, anticipating that the latency would become irritating when playing real instruments, but it just wasn't an issue at all. Any timing problems that I ran into were caused by my own sloppy playing rather than the headphones, and that isn't what I expected. What I have discovered throughout these experiments is just how liberating it is to have the freedom to be able to walk around the studio, hit record, tweak parameters, move my camera, dig through boxes of equipment to find that one thing that I need but can never remember where I've put it, and not have to worry about taking my headphones on and off constantly or having the cable get caught up in my guitar strings. It has genuinely been brilliant and much better than I thought it would be. Another area that I can see these being really useful is when DJing, because even though you're constrained to a really small space, or at least you are in the kind of clubs that I'm DJing in, it can be really easy to forget that you're literally tied to the decks by your headphone cable, and thus risk pulling them off the stand when people come up to request songs or do shots with you or whatever. I've only had these for a few weeks, so I've not had the chance yet to test them in a live DJing environment, but it seems like they should work pretty well. You might struggle a wee bit if you're trying to do something especially clever, or perhaps syncing up the audio purely by ear when using a booth monitor, but if you set up your cue points correctly, make use of the visual display in Serato or whatever waveform to match the rhythm and tempo of the track that is currently playing, then the latency becomes pretty much irrelevant anyway, and you should be totally fine. Ever since I first heard about the concept of low latency headphones for music production, I was deeply skeptical, and I fully expected these to be a great idea or theory, but awful in practice. However, I have genuinely found myself really enjoying using them and exploring different ways to make use of their low latency offering that hadn't occurred to me before, like editing this video on my laptop with wireless headphones, which was never really possible with Bluetooth because of the lag, or hooking them up to the hi-fi amp that I use with my PlayStation for playing late at night, which has also been great. And I don't have to plug into, you know, the controller with a cable and get all fangled up. It's another added bonus. Now, these are not going to be suitable for every scenario, and I'm sure that if you're a perfectionist with particular use cases, then inevitably you'll be able to find something to complain about. But I personally, honestly, have been won over. The reality is that there aren't many options out there for ultra low latency wireless headphones, and for just £135, the quality and freedom that you get with these is pretty difficult to argue with. Having tried some of the other brand leaders personally, I do think that these actually stack up fairly well. You can find more details about these in the link below. If you're interested, check them out for yourself, and until next time, thanks for watching, see you later.